Hi green lovers! It's mid-April and I wanted to give you a peek at some of my favorite spaces in the garden today. Not a complete garden tour, just a little bit of a look here and there at some of the spaces that are bringing me a lot of joy at this time of the year. The first space is my Brassica and Allium patch here. Now I planted these all from seed, all of these brassicas that you see, some of them flowering like the bok choy, but these are all different varieties of kale that have just sort of exploded into growth and are giving us a lot of food and beauty at this time of year. I've also got one of my absolute favorite plants in the garden, my purple tree collard that I have named Colleen. What, you don't name your plants? Well, Colleen's really special, and maybe I'll do an entire episode dedicated to Colleen right from the time that I got her as a little cutting. And this part is an allium patch. I'm growing large onions here, and I've got a video that I talk about how I got these planted and what are some of the things that you need to look for in order to get a nice big onion harvest. So fingers crossed, I'm going to be getting some big onions here, hopefully not too far in the future. Speaking of alliums, I wanted to show you another allium that I am growing quite a bit of this year, and that is garlic. I've got different varieties of soft neck garlic here. I've actually also got some hardneck garlic that I am growing both in this pot as well as down here. I've got an entire patch of hardneck garlic. Now, hardneck garlic does not grow well in my part of the world, Zone 9B, Northern California, but I just want to see how it grows. I hear the scapes are delicious and I want to try those. I've also got a bunch of scallions growing here that are doing absolutely magnificent. I am using so much of these greens, and I have got some elephant garlic. I was at Whole Foods the other day and I saw this large bulb of organic elephant garlic and I said, why not? I'm going to try and plant it. And guess what? Every single one of them has sprouted. So I'm hoping that they will perennialize here and I can actually be harvesting both greens as well as some elephant garlic going forward. Now this is Artie. This is another plant that I have named, and I actually did a video on planting globe artichoke and growing more perennials in your garden. And the exciting thing about Artie is he is getting his very first artichoke. So this is just one of those plants, artichokes, that grow really, really well in our hot California climate. They are Mediterranean crops, and we have a Mediterranean climate. Here's another plant that I am growing up this trellis. This is scarlet runner beans, but what I wanted to show you, pardon the mess in the background, I've got some projects that I'm working on there. I wanted to show you this ladder mesh. It's a little bit difficult to see with the sun coming in from the back, but this is something that you can get for under $4 at something like Home Depot, and it kind of looks like this. I have connected two of them together and I've made this arch. I've got little ties, zip ties at the top, and this arch is going to support these scarlet runner beans. So if you're interested in a cheap arch option, look into ladder mesh. It won't hold very heavy plants, but it should do a good job on things like runner beans and pole beans. I also wanted to show you my plant nursery. I've already got some of my tomato plants in the ground, but as you can see, I've got a lot of them that are still waiting to be planted. I've got about 50 different varieties that I'm growing this year, so I'm really hoping that I will find enough space in my garden to plant all of these. Yeah, the plant nursery is really one of my favorite spaces because it shows the potential of the garden that is coming up in the gardening season ahead of me. Here I've got a bunch of peppers, I've got some ground cherry plants, I've got some squash and cucumber, and look at my ginger. My ginger is growing so nicely. More garlic. I just could not get enough garlic this year. And down here I've got some of my peppers that I had overwintered that are coming to life again. So excited to see how they do. I'm particularly excited about my serrano pepper because that's one of those that took ever to actually produce fruit last year. So I'm glad that this plant survived the overwintering, and I'm hoping to get serranos earlier in the year. And here's another absolute favorite of mine, my single seed challenge plant, doing so nicely. Actually, I noticed a flower and I'm going to pluck off this flower. Watch me be brutal in this video, because you know what? This thing needs to be pruned in order for it to concentrate on growth. It is too early to be producing flowers at this time of year. So hopefully this plant will bush out and start to grow nicely. And let's see how my single seed challenge does. It's my Chinese 5-color pepper. I wanted to show you this part of the garden that is going through a seasonal change. As we wrap up winter and we are well into spring now, the peas are starting to peter out, because you know, we're getting some days in like the mid-80s, and peas don't just like that kind of hot weather. So I am saving these plants because, as you can see, there are seed pods and I want to be able to save seeds for my next year planting. But in the meanwhile, I've got some sweet peas. Look at those pretty pink flowers, and then some white flowers there that are starting to bloom, which is also exciting. And I have got a scarlet runner bean that I have planted. I'm hoping that will grow. And I am also really excited about this chayote plant, and I will do more on this in a future video, but I'm hoping that it will grow on this trellis and maybe even take over the trellis later in the year if it grows well. First time I'm growing chayote, so excited to see how that does. Subscribe and follow along if you want to see how some of these new and unique plants that I'm growing are doing in my garden. Another favorite plant of mine, and I've got these in many different places in my garden, is the Egyptian walking onion. Now this is also called a tree onion or a top set onion, and the reason is because the onions set at the top, which is really interesting. It's almost like outworldly fiction kind of stuff, but yeah, this grows onions at the top, and when it gets heavy with onions, it bends, and then the onion plants, each of these is an onion plant, starts to grow, and that's how it walks around your garden. So excited to see how that does. A lot of my garden is still in prep phase. I've got a lot of projects going on here and there, and I got a load of wood chips delivered a couple of days ago, and I am going to be using this wood chip as mulch around my tomatoes and my other plants, because in a hot, dry California weather, water is the biggest problem. We are going through a drought this year, so I want to make sure I'm doing all that I can to conserve water and to water less. So mulch is going to be my best friend this year. I'm growing sunchokes or Jerusalem artichoke for the first time as well this year, and the plant is growing really nicely. I'm hoping that it will perennialize in my zone, but I understand that it can be pretty invasive. The tubers that form underneath, I think they're rhizomes, they grow very vigorously. They are supposedly very delicious. I've not eaten them yet, excited to try them this year. They're a great food crop to have, but they will invade the rest of your garden. And so I am growing it in a pot, and let's see how it does. I might eventually decide to dedicate a space to it in my garden if I like it enough, but I haven't eaten it yet, so that is still a TBD. But in the meanwhile, it's a very interesting plant to grow. It's a member of the sunflower family and produces beautiful yellow sunflower-like flowers, so I'm anxious to see those appear as well. This is another part of my garden. I've got 6 raised beds here, which are about 12 feet by 4 feet each in size, and some of them are taller than others. They're all in various stages of getting prepared for the summer plants, but I wanted to show you these absolutely gorgeous Buttercrunch lettuce plants. Now, these have actually been pretty heat tolerant. They are very delicious. The leaves, as you can see, are nice and hardy, and they just, they just keep producing. So I am absolutely loving this plant. I've got some cilantro here, and the way to deal with cilantro and prevent it from bolting as long as possible is to get very aggressive with it. Now look at this thick stalk. This is a stalk that's going to be blooming shortly, and I don't want it to bloom, so there you go. I will be eating this, and this plant will continue to produce leaves for a while more. Let's see how long I can keep this going. I think eventually it's going to get beyond my capacity and it is going to bolt, but I am going to try my best to slow that down and push that out as far as possible. The romaine is bolting, can't control that. Another beautiful lettuce that I'm growing is the Paris Cause Island lettuce. It is huge. It's difficult to see how big this is, but this is, yeah, it's easily over a foot tall and equally wide, actually more than a foot tall and more than a foot wide. So that's a big lettuce, and again, nice thick leaves that are actually very tasty and very heat tolerant, clearly. I've got an asparagus patch here. This is my second year. I did not harvest any asparagus. Actually had a lot of the spikes come up and they got killed off by some late frost that we had. So I need to do a better job covering them up next year. But in the meanwhile, I am letting these grow and I'm hoping that they will form nice roots and maybe next year I can start harvesting. More onions here. Also the large variety. I've got some beets growing. All of this is just space that I'm eventually going to clear up for my summer garden. But in the meanwhile, I've just thrown in some leeks and scallions, and I've got some beets growing there. I've got some parsley that I found in the walkway that I dug up and I put here. It needs to green up a little bit, but yeah, parsley is such a hardy plant. This here's another patch that I really love, and this is leeks. I have never grown leeks before, and they are growing nicely. Growing nice and thick, actually. The stems are starting to thicken up here, and I am hoping to enjoy some delicious potato leek soup this year. I've got some scallions. I think these are Zabroon scallions, but they're very pretty. And how I use them is I actually leave the plant in the ground. As you can see here, I just harvest the top. I leave the root in there and that actually grows a new plant, which is kind of nice because you never have to pull out the plant. I've got celery here, and yeah, it's a challenge plant to grow, not for the faint at heart. So we'll see how they do. Again, another bed that I am prepping for my summer plants, but I do have a nice little Bright Lights Swiss chard that I'm still harvesting from. But yeah, it's in its second year and it is bolting. It is going to seed. Just a few more things here and there. These are planters that we put in last year and filled with soil. I've got some carrots growing in there, some beets. Oh, this broccoli is on its way out. This is an interesting one. This is turnips, and I cannot believe how fast these turnip greens grow. I would say in 2 weeks it went from a tiny plant to a huge, beautiful mess like this. I've also got some kohlrabi. This is a quick star kohlrabi. As you can see, I've got a nice, it's not even a softball size. It's probably a cricket ball size. But I am anxious to eat this. This is the first time I'm growing this. Again, a very fast producing kohlrabi. It is supposed to produce in 45 days. I would say this was more like 60 days, but still really good to be able to get kohlrabi, in that short period of time. And this is my strawberry patch. I transferred this from a different part of my garden and planted it in here, and the leaves are just huge. So it obviously really likes the spot. It has started producing runners that I'm bearing and hoping to get more strawberries. But yeah, this is supposed to be all for strawberries, except that things like this are starting to pop up. This is borage. I did not plant this, so it just showed up. I also have some sage that I saw growing in the garden from seeds that had dropped, so I just sort of popped it in there. I like putting little herbs here and there in my little bed, in my garden beds, because they do tend to keep the critters away. But speaking of critters, I do have a lot of ants, and ants usually mean that they are farming aphids. So I'm gonna have to get some neem oil on that, because I want strawberries this year and I do not want them to be infested with aphids. I've got some more little planters here. The bin that you see in the middle, that's a worm tower. I've done other videos on these. I will link in the description. This here is an iceberg lettuce, delicious. but obviously reaching the end of its life cycle. I've got some more Perennials lettuce here, and I have got a patch of spinach. Now this thing is going to go to seed very shortly, so I'm going to have to get aggressive at pruning it like I am doing with this, but again, this is going to seed so fast I just cannot keep up with pruning off these flower spikes, so I'm just going to have to let it go, just like I am doing with that Perennials lettuce. It turns into beautiful blooms which bring in beautiful pollinators, so no, all's not lost. A few little nasturtiums growing here and there. Some more Egyptian walking onions. Oh, I actually wanted to show you this because this is actually starting to walk. So this is dropping and it's producing another flower spike, which is going to produce more onions. So weird, huh? This is a weird plant, but delicious onions and very, very productive. I highly recommend it. I've got some dill growing here as well. Dill does tend to bolt during the warmer season, so it's reaching the end of its life, but I absolutely love dill, even if it's just a matter of crushing some of the leaves and smelling it. Smells so good. And the final place that I wanted to share with you was this spot in my garden that until the beginning of this year was nothing. I had no plants growing in here except a couple of rose bushes, so and the African trailing daisies. Other than that, I planted everything this year. The sweet peas that are growing up that trellis. I've got nasturtiums between those yellow daisies. I've got some irises. So it's kind of like that cottage garden feel. I am just planting random flowers here and there, and just kind of seeing how this thing looks. I'll eventually make it more organized, but right now I am just enjoying the beauty of all these different types of plants that are growing. I've got a beautiful oak tree here that provides an intense amount of shade as well as steals nutrients from the soil under it. So I can't grow very much here other than things like hostas, which are shade-loving plants. I've got some astilbe. I've got some more hostas there. So yeah, just some random things, but you know what? You want to have a space where you can just play, just be yourself. A little herb patch growing here that is actually plants that I'm going to need to put in the garden, and I am hoping that I'll be able to tuck them in here and there, just like I did with these herbs. These are chamomile, and here I've got some amaranth. Yeah, just odds and ends of things that are bringing me so much joy. So that's it, green lovers. I hope you enjoyed this little garden tour. And until next time, live green and love your greens.